Tell
definitely.
me a little bit about yourself. Tell me,
Well,
what you do, what your background is.
what I do is pretty much I'm in privacy consulting. So I that is my gig. I'm all about privacy advocacy. So growing up, I've always looked for basically helping the little guy promote privacy rights. So if you had, so I it's kind of hard because it's funny that we met because I was about whistleblowing. So I'm always been a whistleblower or been the person running to HR saying someone's rights haven't been advocated for. So and it's probably because we moved around. When I read your LinkedIn about me, I really resonated with that because we were the kids that moved around a lot too. And my little brother was the one that was always getting picked on. So I was the one always running to the teacher saying my brother's getting picked on or he's being bullied. And I was the one always fighting for the bullies or fighting for the little kid that was getting bullied. And it carried over into the workplace. So whenever I saw someone that was getting bullied or discriminated against, I was the one running to HR fighting for that person, which meant that I was always the whistleblower. And what happened was I discovered that in a culture that said, we are the best employers and we are the ones that advocate for having policies and procedures to protect people from being discriminated. If you were a whistleblower, you actually kind of got a target on your back because you were the person that was always rocking the boat and saying that the brand wasn't actually as shiny as everyone pretended it was. The culture wasn't actually as clean because I was the one saying leaders weren't protecting the ones that they were supposed to. Nobody wanted to have a black mark on their reputation saying that they actually had a problem. And what happened was because they weren't following what, and I don't know if I can say this on your podcast, but there's a book written called The No Asshole Rule.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was leaders would cherry pick an asshole. They would hire someone who would be the bulldog in the pen who would clean up a certain department. But what happens is when you hire these bulldogs, they were horrible leaders. So you might have a great culture, but you would hire this bulldog who treated some of the staff and they would ruin the culture because they would treat employees poorly. They would be a jerk or they would be a bully. They would be a great performer. They would have all the budget. They would be really great at their job, but they would be a horrible leader.
So that's an interesting point. How can they be great at their job? Yeah, I just want to just keep talking about this now. Like, how can they be great at their job? Like, them being great at their job is a function of some criteria that they're being judged against.
So they would meet all their key performance indicators. So for instance, they would balance their budget. So for instance, I work in the health authority. So they would be a great brain surgeon. They would be great on all their surgeries, a heart surgeon.
Objective things.
Objective measurables, but they would have horrible bedside manner. So for instance, all their nurses and their doctors would have high absenteeism because they can't work with the doctor because the doctor would literally throw his charts at them.
Yeah. So why do you think it's so hard for leaders to have more of a balanced, holistic approach to what makes a good performer? Is it laziness? Is it just the inherent nature of some of these sort of more ethereal, more sort of subjective things that they're harder to kind of pin down? So it's just like, we just won't even worry about it. Like what is it and how do we sort of address and fix that?
I think the problem is I think people start promoting people based on they used to promote based on CVs. So basically if they want someone who looks good on paper. So if you have so in the health authority region, so for instance, if you look good on paper, so you've written so many papers, you have so many letters behind your name, you look good on paper. So we promote you because you are the most accredited person and we want you on our board. But you've never taken an HR training course. You've never taken a webinar on how to be a people person. So what happens is we now give you, with your designation and your new leadership role, you now have 50 direct reports. And now you're supposed to lead them. And you've never even done a public speaking Toastmasters course.
So there's these things that sort of come along with a job or a promotion that they're frankly just not even equipped to get. Like you're putting
No.
someone into deep waters and they've never swam outside of a pool before or something.
And part of that job description is you're writing a performance review on your staff. Well, how do you write a performance review on a nurse when you've never had a one-on-one with her and you don't know what it's like to do rounds on a patient? So when she comes to you and says, I'm struggling with a patient who is kicking and fighting me because they have dementia, and you're a doctor who just wrote a dissertation on a report and you've never actually been a frontline nurse, there's this huge disconnect. Yet boards of directors are putting those responsibilities on these people. So it's a disconnect in the culture. It's a hierarchy that they've never actually drilled down to think about the actual frontline staff and what we're doing.
Yeah,
And then the nurse, yeah,
they've read about dementia, but they've never seen it. They've never
they've
felt
never
it
seen
or
it.
experienced it. And
No,
then they have to manage and judge somebody who lives it.
who lives it, exactly. And they were themselves never a nurse because they never came up through, that was never their career trajectory. So they were never a nurse and then became a doctor. They went to med school and they became a doctor first.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the military when somebody comes out of like officer school and they were never an infantryman. And
Exactly.
they don't understand what it's like living in the foxhole or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Exactly.
So
But
what is
see, yeah,
yeah,
that's
go
strange.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, and it's different though, because in the army, you're allowed to yell at your subordinates, and that builds character. And you're not allowed to say you're a bully. That's just
Right.
the rule of the game. And in doctors and nurses, and even with residents, it's sort of accepted that you're allowed to be bullied. The doctor is allowed to yell at the intern. But what happens is from a psychological standpoint, we have all these nurses and doctors who have PTSD and that are taking stress leaves, and they're sick because they go to work with stomach aches, and they're actually supposed to be in a healthcare environment. And that's the biggest irony. Working in a healthcare environment is the most unhealthiest place to work, and yet you're supposed to be treating people to get better.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. Like, let's spend some time on that. I mean, it's almost
Well,
like
that's why I quit my job because it was the most unhealthiest place. It was the most toxic work environment working in health authorities
but
through my career.
there's this built-in caste system to it.
Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, you got the surgeons and then you got the doctors and then you got the
Yep.
nurses and then you got the I don't know how it all works, but
It is. And
and
you
it's
want
allowed.
it's allowed. And the doctors have a God mentality. So I started as a medical transcriptionist where I plugged in and I listened to doctors dictate and I wrote all the stuff down and transcribed their reports. So I was a fly on the wall. So I heard people's most intimate details, their health information. And then I learned to protect that data. And that's what got me into the privacy realm. So I kind of grew up in that environment from the ground up. But you want a doctor who thinks they're a god when they're operating on you, because you want someone who believes they're a god, because you want them to save your life. But you do not want to work for someone who thinks they're a god because they're not humble. You want a humble leader. You want a leader who is so humble that when you make a mistake, they remember that they're human too, and they don't throw a book at you.
Right. And so it's almost like what it takes to be a great doctor, this sort of God complex
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, which is
Yeah,
really manifests itself, if I'm following you, it manifests itself in sort of a certain confidence that
exactly.
I'm in I'm in the OR and I got to make this tough decision or whatever. You need that confidence. You don't need somebody second guessing themselves. But outside of the OR, that translates into something that's, the opposite of humility or the opposite
Exactly.
of actually empathy, which is so great. I mean, to your point, this is such a counterintuitive thing, right? It's
Exactly.
supposed to be a place of caring. It's supposed to be a place of treating patients and taking care of people. And it ends up turning into the people who are trying to administer it, the hearts and hands of these organizations, which are the nurses, the people on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
They are fighting their own sort of internal battle because of the work conditions that they're subject to.
Exactly. And we are talking about sweeping stereotypes. So the stereotype is a heart surgeon. And so when you were a secretary in the hospital, a heart surgeon and a brain surgeon were the worst people. You never wanted to work for them. I worked for a gastroenterologist, which was a gut doctor. So he was shady to work for, we used to say. It was tongue in cheek. A pediatrician was the best doctor to work for, because a pediatrician, they work on little babies. So they had the best bedside manner because they were used to working with parents. So they could go into the OR room, they could be a god, but they could come out to the bed and they could talk to the parents and hold their hands.
So
So
why
they were
does
the
that?
best
Yeah. So why does that work? Like
because they were more human. I don't know why. They just had bigger hearts.
but
It calls a
is
certain
it function?
personality to the job.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg there? Is it like the people with the big hearts, they end up going into the pediatric area, or is
I
it,
think so.
does it reinforce itself? Like, is it a sort of a survivorship bias thing where the people with the biggest hearts end up being the best pediatricians because of these, because of these aspects of the job, or is it kind of the other way? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, and I don't know. I've never met a pediatrician who was a brain specialist. So maybe there are a few assholes out there that are just really, and then throw in Asperger's. Maybe you never know. But there are some sweeping stereotypes out there.
Yeah, and obviously stereotypes are dangerous, but on the other
Mm-hmm.
side, they also like exist for a reason. And if as a secretary or an admin or whatever, if you actually feel those things on a day-to-day basis and you talk to other folks about it and they say, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I feel that way too. He's a brain surgeon or he's a heart surgeon, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's some basis for it often.
Well, because then it's just statistics. It's like the statistics dictate that this stereotype is relatively true.
So what does, so what we're really talking about here, we're going to talk about, we're talking about a kind of a bunch of things, but in the
Mm-hmm.
context of what we're talking about right now, we're talking about sort of cultural elements and how certain players in an organization are enabled or empowered to do sort of um, uncouth things and treat people like garbage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those end up being sort of defining elements in the culture that end up trickling down into the other little microcosms that you might see that same microcosm within the nurses station, where the highest nurse then it's like all that stuff sort of starts to roll downhill. How do we start to fix it, or how do the people at the top, so to speak, fix it? And how do they get that balance of, like, I need somebody who's a great doctor, but I'm going to weed my garden of weeds that are wrecking the lives of the people that I'm relying on to deliver the type of care that our organization has a mission to provide.
That's a good question. I think it starts with educating the masses on how to speak better. And when I say that, I mean I learned to manage up. So when I had a difficult manager, I had to learn to communicate in a more assertive way. So for instance, if a manager came at me and perhaps was attacking what I thought was my character, I had to be able to say to them, when you when you approach me and you're questioning my ability to complete this project on time, I feel like you're insinuating that I am lazy. I want you to understand that you gave me these two other projects to work on, and I was focusing my attention on that. Did I misunderstand that you wanted me to change my priorities? And then give them an opportunity to communicate back to me a change of priorities. It's like we have to re-educate people on how to communicate more concisely, because what happens is when people start attacking character, or I'm sorry, that's really funny when you are you actually calling me lazy? That seems like a silly thing to say. And then people retract and go, oh, I'm not saying you're lazy, I'm just saying I don't understand why you're working on that instead of this. It's like changing the dialogue again, because I honestly like to think that humans are generally good people and we don't come to work to attack people and to belittle each other's characters. I think we bring stuff from home and we're parented a certain way at home that we bring that baggage and we project it on other people unintentionally.
Yeah, and you said something just now about opening up the dialogue, and it's almost really about establishing a dialogue and
Yeah,
opening up a conversation about these things. If you turn your steering wheel and your car goes off the road, you never say, "What an idiot car I have."
yeah,
You know what I'm
exactly.
saying? Like, but we tend to think that we almost assume negative intent in our subordinates or the other people on our
Hmm.
team, when in actuality, to your point, people are just trying to do a good job. People are generally trying to make a positive impact in the world. I think most people would say that they want to leave the world in a better place than they found it,
Mhm.
right? So all those sort of
Exactly.
positive foundational elements are there. And if you can assume those things, then you as a leader can open up the possibility that, okay, well, maybe I was unclear in my direction, or maybe I forgot that that this person's overloaded with 5 projects and they're just trying to prioritize. You can't do 5 things at once, to your point. Um,
Exactly.
so is managing up like, is your, like, you seem like someone who's probably good at managing up, and I'm wondering, and just from your perspective, do you think that that's rooted more in your personality, your assertive personality, or your sort of desire for clarity, or do you feel like it was something that, irrespective of those sort of personality traits, it was a skill that you had to develop, and really everybody needs to develop it?
It was a survival skill. It was me going to a mentor or a colleague at work saying, I think my boss has it out for me. Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm getting these negative vibes from my boss. I honestly feel like he's not happy with my performance. I keep trying to impress him. And no matter what I do, I feel like my boss just is not happy with my performance. And the person said, you need to manage up. And I didn't know what that term meant. And so she gave me some books to read. And she said, this is what it means. It means when your boss comes to you and says ABC, you need to basically turn the tables back to him and repeat ABC back and then ask a clarifying question. She says that is what managing up means. She says, because he's sending you mixed signals and you need to clarify that. Now, for me, it was always with my male bosses that I struggled with this. And I don't know if it was a gender thing, but in my experience, it seemed to be the male bosses that would send me the mixed signals. But I also found that it was in my government positions that I struggled the most with this. And I don't know if it was just because in government, I don't know, but I predominantly worked in government, so that's also why it was also my experience. But I always had to take careful notes, but I had to learn. It was a survival mechanism, but I worked in it seemed like I worked in a lot of toxic environments. So I always took notes from my meetings. So whenever I went back to someone, I always had something tangible. So it was never personal. I was always like, based on our last conversation, we discussed this. I just need to clarify, was this still the direction we were going, or was there a change in direction? And being a secretary, I was always in a subordinate role. So, and I always was a secretary to executives. So I always was fighting with ego. I needed to be very careful and tactful to tiptoe around the ego, because I never could tell my boss they were wrong. I always had to say, I just needed to clarify that I didn't misunderstand what your intention was. And I was, eventually my career progressed that I was the executive assistant to the chair of the assistant chair of the Department of Pediatrics. I was the executive assistant to the vice president. So you got very good. And then I still fought with some of them still wanting me to get them coffee in the morning. So there was still this sexist thing where they leave a $5 bill on my cubicle saying, double, get me a double in the morning. And I would still pretend to like put my files down on top of it saying, sorry, I didn't see your note, because I would still refuse to get them coffee because that was not my job. My job was to be your assistant, which I was very good at, but I would not fetch your coffee. If you were buying my coffee, then I'll get you a coffee, but I'm not going to buy your coffee. And so it was this little dance that we played.
What do you think it is, this ego thing? It's very bizarre, but it's almost like as somebody ascends in an organization, there's more like the ego gets bigger. And when I say bigger, it's almost like becomes more fragile as it grows or something.
It's inflated. It isn't inflated. It's like it's this inflated balloon. But then I always remember it's filled with helium, and if you let the helium out, you're gonna sound like a munchkin when you speak with it. Because you're really a joke. Because ultimately, you go to the bathroom and you have the same bowel movement that I do, and that's what I used to always remember. And I had this one woman; she was a dragon lady, and she had, out of her staff,
What
she
is that?
had
What is that?
oh
Drag?
she was a dragon lady. She was the female equivalent of an asshole to work for.
Got it.
So she had 20 direct reports, and 8 of them were out on stress leaves. and they were allowed to return to work, but they couldn't work for her. But the problem was that she was hired to clean up the department. And even though she had all of these people who had personal reasons why they could not work for her because she was a horrible boss. But the department hired her because they wanted a bulldog in the pen. And I knew all of this because I was her right-hand person. I was her EA. So I was the one who did all of her dirty work. I read all of her emails. I knew everything, but I was bound by the rules of confidentiality. And they all wanted me to whistleblow on her, but I couldn't because the whole tenet of my role was to be her representative.
What was
So
that
my
like?
job, I went home every single day with a stomach ache because I knew how she spoke to her subordinates, and I knew that she was very good at her job. She never said anything that was demeaning. She always was she was very professionally demeaning, but she never crossed the line.
So what does that look like?
It was very tongue in cheek, very cutting remarks, but nothing that you could take it to a lawyer. So
So she played the game right. She knew
he
how to play the
played
game. She knew how to be a jerk and cut people and cut them down and squeeze them
exactly.
out.
And
And
she called into question their performance on things. And everyone, if you put people under a microscope, they're going to fail.
yeah, do you know that saying, at least down here, where it's like everyone is committing like multiple felonies every day? They don't
Exactly.
even know it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're all imperfect. No one's perfect. And so, and if you, and no one wants to, like, I worked for a person who was a cop. So she taught me amazing stuff, but she literally was an investigative police officer. So when she would come into my cubicle, it literally felt like I was pulled over by a police officer and my taillight was out. And I would get a cold sweat, and she would basically go through my file and she'd tell me all the things I did wrong. And then she's like, how are you gonna fix it? And I literally felt like I was being read the riot act. I learned so much from her, but she had the worst bedside manner. So I literally would break out into a cold sweat every time my boss came into my cubicle. She had a horrible reputation, and eventually the company downsized and maneuvered situations so that she lost her job.
Mm.
And it was a very horrible way that they exited her out of the company. It was by the book. She couldn't fight it with a lawyer, um, but it wasn't fair. Like
Did
and
she
every
create
and
that?
every
Did she create that in a way, you feel?
she created it because she didn't they tried to send her to leadership courses. She could have tried to be a more fluffy person, but she just dug her heels in it and said no. So she
So
could have met them halfway if she wanted to.
so maybe this is a simplification of like humans, but on one side you might have somebody who acclimates toward task over human, task over people. They put task
Yeah,
first. And on the other
that's true.
side, you have people who put people over task. And at the extremes, you have these jerks that you're talking about, who don't care at all. And maybe they're narcissists, or maybe they're sociopaths or psychopaths or whatever sort
Who
of
knows? Yeah.
on that side. I don't know. And then on the other side, sort of the caricature is somebody who just is all talk. They're just all fluffy, like you said, or they're all, it's an empty suit, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why is it that in your mind that as you, again, this is a stereotype or a generality, but as you go up higher and higher, there's just so many more people on that first side of the spectrum that I talked about, where it's task over people almost to a fault, or like the rate of sort of bad bedside manner, as you know, as a sort of a shorthand for people who are kind of jerks to work for, the ratio seems to be higher as you go up a company. What is that?
I think it goes back to like sort of that article you wrote. It's about we're under a pyramid structure nowadays. So when you get to that top of the pyramid, it's lonely at the top and you don't have anyone checking you anymore. So when you're at that top, you're by yourself, your ego gets inflated and you just start to be king of the castle again. So you've now pushed everyone off of the top of the hill. You're at the top of the castle and you start to think I can rule the roost and do whatever I want. And you start to get a little cocky and you just start playing the game all by yourself.
Do you think it's just because it feels so good to just start to think that, man, I can
Sure
do
it does. Oh yeah, it feels great. If no one's checking you, like I think the world would be a wonderful place if I got to rule it. Don't we all feel that way? If you know what, when you're sitting home alone and you have full remote control, and you get to, and you don't have no kids climbing on you, you have no wife telling you to change the channel, it's just you and that remote, it feels great.
Yeah.
Imagine if it was your company, imagine if it was your world. We all ride that. We don't, it takes a real moral person with a really good compass and real strong ethics to actually want to step up and be a good leader. And I think we've gotten away from teaching people, because what happens is we're not teaching children. Look at what we're feeding children on cartoons. We're not teaching them morals. We're not teaching them ethics. We're not teaching them to be good human beings anymore. So if they're not learning that from a small age, and then we're not putting them in organizations where we're changing the structure, like we really need to be changing the structure of our organizations to be customer focused. Uh, where the customer is the centric model. We need to get away from these hierarchies where it's the CEO, where we make the CEO happy and all the subordinates surround making that CEO happy. It should all be customer focused and value-based focus. And how are we sustaining the environment along the way when we're doing that? If we turn everything on its end, then we have a better shot at having people at the top being better humans.
Yeah, and I think what we're kind of talking about is this thing called CEO disease, which
Yeah,
is what we're describing, right? Um,
exactly.
and so I think rooted in that, again, just to kind of echo what you're saying, is a lack of accountability.
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
and so my question to you is, then what is the role of a board? Is a board just a joke?
Oh, I think a board's a joke. I think the board needs to be I think boards need to be made up of customers,
Oh,
unpaid customers. So have like be accountable to a cooperative of people. That's who you should be accountable to and pay
yeah.
them shares or dividends. Don't see a board is just a collection of people who are getting paid. So the CEO's friends is what it seems like to me.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's not true, to your point, I think what you're saying is, if it's not
I
truly
know.
objective, if it's not truly objective and there's no true accountability, then what's the point of it? It's a check the box function in and of itself that
Hmm.
does nothing to deflate the ego, or maybe we don't even have to deflate it, but just sort of keep the behaviors in check.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, it seems like, the root, the tree is rooted in one person at some level, or in one
Yeah.
entity. And if it's not the board, and the board's not, corporate governance and this whole sort of school of thought and all the literature that's on the role of
Hmm.
a board, like that's all very clear. And I think in theory, it's supposed to correct for all the stuff you're talking about,
It
right?
is supposed to, in theory, but do we see it happening?
Well, I think if it was happening, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. You know what I'm
Exactly.
saying? Because this is not a one-off conversation. That
Yeah,
thing I wrote is not a one-off situation. This is like the majority at this point.
exactly. If you were to stop the average person, like take a hospital board. So there's a big pompous board in a hospital, but if you were to stop a patient on the street and say, tell me who your board members are, they wouldn't know. The board doesn't represent the average patient. And so
What do they
we've got,
represent, you think?
they represent, they're just, it's just another collective that are getting paid.
It's a country
So
club.
it's a country club, yeah. And they're so far removed from the everyday patient. So the patients aren't getting a vote. The patients don't know who the board members are. They don't, I've gone to some of these board meetings and they have these town hall meetings where the patients can talk to them, but they're so pompous. They have formal minutes. You get to stand up at a mic and you maybe get to say a few words to them, but you feel like you're talking to a monarchy.
It's a
You
joke.
don't feel it is a joke. It's you don't feel properly representative, but we need to get back to the grassroots where the people have a vote, the people have a say. You can't even, you have like I have a granddaughter right now who has cancer, and for us to go visit her when she's getting chemo treatment, we have to pay $25 in parking. So for us to visit our sick grandbaby cost us $25 a day in parking. Now, I wish I knew a board member that I could go to and say, excuse me, my daughter, my granddaughter is sick and I have to pay $25. Who made that decision that you're charging us? I already pay taxes. Like, could we not get a break on the parking fee so that I could just go visit my sick grandbaby?
Yeah. And do you think it is a function of sort of heartless people on the board who are really just kind of out for themselves? Or do you feel like it's a function of this structure is just so big that these well-meaning people who are really trying to make a difference and, hey, I'm getting involved with this board because I want to try to make things better, but they're really just kind of, they're trying to turn a battleship, or they're kind of swimming upstream to such an extent that whatever change they're trying to drive, they just can't. You know what I'm saying? And again, maybe this is it's all over the place. I don't know, but what's your read on that?
I think you're totally right. I think it's just a broken system. They're really trying to turn a battleship. What I'd like to see, and I think it's also an older generation that is sitting in those chairs.
Hmm.
What we need to see is I would love to see us raising smarter entrepreneurs. So as we're raising our little babies to be these ethical, better human beings, I want them to be entrepreneurs. I want them to be dreamers who are taking these old archaic systems that they're inheriting and turning them on their head, saying, let's build a better ship. Like,
Mm.
we had this Titanic that we inherited. Let's build a spaceship, or let's build a yellow submarine, and let's just do something totally that's never been dreamt before and create something totally brand new to have a different deliverable.
So how
Because
do we empower them to do that? And how do we shortcut the impact that you're talking about versus just waiting the 30 years for this new generation to, take the helm of these Titanics, to use your analogy? How do we shortcut that? Which, if we can do that, we can hopefully, cross your fingers,
yeah,
avoid the potential, jadedness that can come from being chewed up and spit out by the machines that they're stepping into.
I think we start saying, you know what, we might have been wrong. We have to let our egos go and say, you know what, we did the best we could with the knowledge we had at the time, but we might have got it wrong, and we're open to new ideas. Because we have to it's the CEOs right now that are in place that have to let their egos go and say, you know what, is there a new way or a new design or something innovative that we can do? And maybe it's these boards saying, we're going to do a scholarship and we're going to open it up to an innovative idea.
Mm.
Bring to us your innovative ideas, and let's open up a scholarship to help these young entrepreneurs um, table this, and let's actually fund it, because we have scholarships for up and coming people. So I think there's ways that we could embrace innovation to do that. But I think what happens is we have to take that king of the hill mentality of saying, I'm right and my way is the only way, and just say, you know what, maybe there's a different way of doing it. Doesn't mean that we're totally wrong, just means that let's take our experience and marry it to something new, and work together.
Yeah, and to use your analogy of the Titanic, it's not totally different than a submarine. Like, they're both in water. They're both sort of
Exactly.
mechanisms to travel, right? Like,
Hmm.
little tweaks can make a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And we learned a lot from the Titanic. Yes, it sunk, but there's millions of ships that were based on that design that are very successful machines.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Let's Man, this is such an interesting it's such an interesting thing, because it feels like, again, a lot of people get into medicine because they want to make a difference, and then they're, whether you're a nurse or whether you're a doctor, you have these kind of, you're when you're in your pure unjaded state, you're over here, and then when you step into these environments and you step into these structures, as you put it, um, those structures begin to influence us, and the
Hmm.
root of all of our behaviors are some emotions, and those structures, to your point, influence the emotions. If you're driving to work with a knot in your stomach and leaving with a knot in your stomach every day, those are inevitably going to sort of start to translate into how your hands interact with the world in a different way, right?
Exactly.
How do we help, prevent people from getting jaded? I mean, it's just such a complex thing. And I don't want to say, okay, well, this is just too big of a problem. It is what it is, suck it up, or, well, deal with it. It's a caste system in a hospital. It is what it is. But what you're talking about is the same thing that, you know, some of our clients are dealing with, and some of the people who call in on our whistleblower line are dealing with. It's a really pervasive type of a problem. How do we help folks either become more prepared for the bombs that are going to be going off overhead, to, you know, to use your PTSD
Mhm.
analogy, and how do we help them to not get jaded? Like, where can it start? Is it even possible?
I think it definitely is possible. For myself, in my experience, I had to realize there's a big difference between what I own and what somebody else owns. So if I'm experiencing negative stuff from somebody else, I have to realize that they're projecting that on me. So if someone's coming at me with a lot of negative emotions, they're reacting to me in a way that doesn't fit the situation. I realize that that's a lot of their emotional baggage or trauma that they're just projecting on me, and that I didn't actually do anything to evoke that stuff. And
Which is hard
I
to actually, that's a hard lesson to learn though.
I learned that through a lot of therapy. So so a lot of companies actually do provide employee family assistance programs or some type of benefits. So if your company does provide benefits, take advantage of that and use the paid therapy sessions. So take advantage of those benefits if they're provided. So I learned that through therapy, to realize that sometimes people's negative stuff has nothing to do with you. Another thing is that realizing you do have control of a situation, and sometimes the control you have is exiting the situation. So in nurses, will commonly change departments. So perhaps one nurse is a difficult person to work for, they'll change departments. So they'll go to another unit, they'll go to another department. If they're working in one department and they don't get along, they'll just post out. So oftentimes you can post to a different floor. Realize that you have control to leave the situation. That's not always best, because sometimes people go, well, I really like my shift there, or I like my colleagues. But ultimately, if you're going home every day with a stomach ache, you have the control to leave the situation. You also have control to take advantage of the policies, so you can report that person. Most HR companies, if they are a reputable company, if someone has 3 strikes against them, they generally do have to go to some type of leadership training.
Have you seen that work?
I did have a manager that went to leadership training. It made the job uncomfortable, because even though they said that my name wasn't going to be told who reported them, I was in a small office. So it was obvious, it was obvious that I'm pretty sure the manager knew I was the one that reported them, and they did go to training. But the thing that really bothered me was, after he completed his leadership training, he got promoted. And I'm
Oh,
like,
now you're a leader. Now you're ready to go to the next level and
now
influence
you
more
got
people.
promoted because you got your leadership training. But on the plus side, he was no longer my immediate manager.
Yeah, but
So I'm like,
what was that like after you made that report, and then
it
what was that
was
like?
it was just really uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. And the thing was, is it actually, my managers, it didn't, he, it proved that his character was a little bit sleazy, because he told everyone that he was going to a public speaking conference, but in his calendar it showed that he was on this leadership training course. So he was so embarrassed, he lied about where he was going every week. So I knew that that's why he was embarrassed, because it was a mandatory training that he had to go to, and he was going with subordinates. But what it did show me was the true, so this is where I tell you, companies have a culture. So yes, the culture said that leadership and growing and being a good leader was valued, but it showed me that there was writing on the wall that I no longer was a good fit with this company.
Mm.
This company was I really, really worked hard to get in the door with this company, and I really believed what I thought it believed in. But I realized I outgrew it.
So talk to
So
me about that. What did you see in this company? You don't have to name it, of course, but what did you see in the company that resonated with you? And then walk me through what that was like, thinking that you know, found the prince and it turned out to be the frog.
well,
How quickly did you know it? When did you know it? What things did you see later that you look back and say, oh man, I should have seen that as I was sort of trying to work to get in there? You know what I'm saying?
Well, they had excellent branding. So they were like voted one of the 50th best companies to work for. They had amazing branding. Their HR was great. I was recruited from another province to join the company. They paid for my moving expenses. They had great benefits, employee benefits. There was a lot of wooing that took place to get me to come to the company. So my onboarding was amazing. Working for the company was a struggle. They promised a lot of cross training. They promised a lot of employee development, paying for education. But when I got on board, all of those promises went to the wayside, and they said, "Well, just do the job. Just do the job. You're doing great." I had amazing performance reviews, so that they were really generous with commendation. But when it came time, well, would you pay for this education? Well, no, we don't have the budget for it. Well, would
Mm.
you pay for this opportunity? Well, no, we don't have the budget for it, but you're doing so good. We rated you four and a half out of five on your performance. You're above, you're exceeding expectations. We don't think you need that education, but for my exit strategy, I needed the education. I wanted the designation for my resume.
And so do you
Um,
feel like they were authentically, that they authentically didn't have the budget? Or do you feel like it was a bait and switch intentionally? Do you feel like you were getting pigeonholed? Was it incidentally a pigeonholing? Like, what do you think was at the core of all that?
I honestly don't think they were intelligent enough to do it strategically. But what happened was, is when I wanted to exit, I was shot in the foot. So what happened is I did exit the company, and it was because of the poor leadership. Because what happened was, is I ended up putting in. I was working two full time. A position above me got, so when that one manager got maneuvered out of her position, I actually was given two full time equivalency positions. So I was doing her job plus my job.
Man.
And when I was complaining about the workload and I was putting in overtime and not getting paid for it, they basically said they just buttered me up. They said, "Well, you're doing such a great job. You're learning so much. Look at all this opportunity you are. Look at how quickly you're learning all these new things." And I'm like, "Well, only learning it because I'm doing the job of two people, and it's affecting my marriage. It's affecting my health. I can't keep up this amount of work. I'm feeling sick. I'm here on my doctor's notes. I can't keep up this working this, and I'm not supported well by my manager. Um, I wasn't feeling the love. And if a company values you, I will work. If I'm valued, I will work extra hard. But I wasn't even getting the thank yous anymore. I was just
Mm.
getting empty flattery, and the flattery was wearing off. It just was starting to feel fake.
And why was it
So
feeling
I
fake?
was because they were saying you're doing such a good job. Here's more work. Could you work more overtime?
Here's another
And then it's like,
shovel. Hey, you're doing great at digging
yeah,
these
and
holes. Here's another shovel.
yeah, exactly. And then I'm like, well, am I going to get paid? And they're like, well, you can take time off in lieu. And I'm like, well,
Yeah, I
when
just
can I
paid you in
take
a
the time
shovel.
off?
I pay you in shovels.
I pay you in shovels. Yeah, it was ridiculous. And so I was planning my exit strategy secretly. And then I realized if I was to leave my job, they're going to say, well, what are your qualifications? And I had no education on paper. I
Mm.
had experience, but how am I going to get a reference from someone who is not happy when they find out I'm leaving?
So we in our organization, we've kind of deprioritized this sort of credential piece because, there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people with credentials who have no business doing what they're doing. And there's a lot of people
True.
without credentials who don't have the degree or whatever, but they got the heart and they got the skills and they got the experience and so forth. Why is that such a hard jump for organizations to make? Is it a question of it's just I need a sort of objective way to in a system to systematize or to process all this influx of interest? Is it a laziness thing? What do you think that is? Because there's a lot of great people who don't get positions that I think they probably should get. This is broadly, right?
Yeah.
That they should get because of what you're talking about.
It's really hard. I think it depends on who's doing the hiring, and it depends on the type of role you're going into. So I found out afterwards what I did is because I knew I wasn't getting my letters behind my name, I started interviewing people who were privacy consultants. So I literally went through the phone book or the internet, found privacy consultants, called them up and said, can I have 15 minutes of your time? I'm a new person in the field. I just wanted to get your opinion because you're a rock star and I had a couple questions. And that was one of my questions was, is it important to have this designation? And everyone came back to me and said, it doesn't matter. What matters is, can you do the work? So I
How
did my own
empowering
market.
was that for you?
It was so empowering because I thought in the health authority, because I'm with doctors, everyone wants the MD, the PhD, the LPN, the RN. It was that environment where the credential was important. But in the real world, ultimately, when someone hires you, they just want to know you can do the job. So what I got was intel about, it's more about having testimonials. It's more about doing the jobs, doing the contracts, maybe bid on a contract, charge a smaller fee, get the testimonial, build up a dossier, build up a case study, build up basically a dossier of clients that will attest to your skills. That is a better entrepreneurial journey to take to build up your boutique of the clientele.
Can a company have an authentic culture or an authentic commitment to culture while at the same time ostensibly, blackballing whistleblowers?
Wow, that's good. I don't think you can blackball whistleblowers. I really think what you should be doing is rewarding people who are whistleblowers. And I wish there was a way not to even call them whistleblowers. Like,
Because it sounds negative.
it sounds so negative. And I think it should be like, I think we should encourage people to
It's
give
like,
commendation openly. Like
yeah,
what,
I don't know. I
let's,
mean, imagine in a manufacturing setting,
hmm,
you have your manufacturing guys, your manufacturing operation, the production, the producing
yeah.
folks, and then you have this other group that is quality control. And imagine firing these people if they find errors in the widgets. That's what
Oh
we're
my
talking
goodness.
about.
No.
That's what we're talking
Yeah,
about with a whistleblower from a culture standpoint.
definitely. And and you need like, I think it would be amazing. And it's not like you don't want to breed a whole bunch of tattletalers about saying, oh, look at so and so said, made fun of someone's skirt being too short or said nice knees or something. Like it's not about, you want to have a certain element of a sense of humor in the workplace. But at the same time, when someone crosses over the line, you want to have checks and balances to be like, you know what? You took that a little too far. And it's okay to say, you know what, I'm human, I'm sorry, and let's move past it. But there has to be, and whistleblowers, you can't have someone have, like, I know from my last job, my manager totally overstepped the line. He pulled me aside. He said things that were really inappropriate. I documented it. I went to HR. I said, this is exactly what he said. They said, are you sure you didn't misunderstand? And I'm like, no, I'll read it back to you. This is
Check the
exactly what he
notes.
said.
Yeah.
Check the notes. I could have recorded it. And they sent him to training. But it would have been really nice if he just came back and said, you know what, I had a really bad day, I had an argument with the wife on the drive to work, and I shouldn't have said that, and I'm sorry. And we could have chalked it up to being a decent human being and just had a cup of coffee and got over it.
Yeah, as long as you go get the coffee.
As long as you go get the coffee and you pay for it. But you know what, like, because we are humans, and sometimes, sometimes we have those asshole moments and we say stupid stuff. But let's just chalk it up to it and say, you know what, I was a crummy human being that moment, and I'm sorry.
Why is it so hard for people to say they're sorry in the workplace?
Because our egos get in the way.
Yeah.
And you know what, and I had a horrible day the other day, and I normally am really good in traffic, but someone slammed on their brakes and my coffee went flying, and I got a mess on my shirt, and I dropped an F-bomb, and I parked my car, and I was shaken up, and I thought, why today? Why today did I show a bad side of my human being? A bad version of me came out today, and I couldn't help but think that poor person probably, a squirrel ran across the road and they just slammed on their brakes. It had nothing to do with me.
Yeah, they weren't looking in their rearview mirror and saying, oh, look, she's taking a sip now. Now's my chance to get her.
Yeah,
You know
this
what I'm
is going to
saying?
be great.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it just flipped a switch in me. And we have those moments. And when we're an employer, we employ human beings. we're not employing robots.
Right.
So we're going to have these human moments. These are emotional human beings that we hire, and we need to tell our organizations, it's okay. We're going to have these moments where we're not our best selves. So how do we handle them? And how
Yeah,
do we move
and
past them?
have grace for that stuff. And I
Yeah,
think there's some safety in the workplace where someone doesn't feel like, man, if I screw up once, I'm out of here. Then there's room for
exactly.
those things. And then there's room for love in the workplace, and there's room for forgiveness, and that we create space for people to be humans. And that's really what we're talking about, because we're not a bunch of
Yes.
machines, to your point.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's the same in hospitals and I think there's a pecking order, and that's what happens is you have it's like a wave. So just like when you're in traffic, one person slams on the brakes, it kind of works through this centipede where
Uh,
everyone has this colliding. And I think that's what happens is you'll have this one moment where someone is a jerk and then they're a jerk to one person and then that person goes down the hall and he's a jerk to someone in the elevator and then that person gets off on another floor and they're a jerk to someone else in the cafeteria and then that person travels down the hallway and they're a jerk to someone in the hallway, and it's just like this little centipede
yeah,
momentum that just ripples out in a pool, and you're just this poor mail carrier at the end of the row who kind of gets shit on and it's like
right.
I didn't do anything. And sometimes we have to realize it's not personal, it's just called being a human.
Yeah, it's just called being a human. So you've worked in a lot of organizations, you've worked with a lot of organizations, and I just have this question um, about HR, because most of the HR folks that I know and deal with, our clients and things like that, I think these are heart people. They want to make a difference. I think some of them end up getting sort of jaded and feel like they've been declawed, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've sort of gotten deeper into this game, I've realized that there's this whole sort of contingent of people out there that view HR as like the enemy, where I've always thought about
Yeah.
it as like, well, they're here to care for the people. And again, this is Nick, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, you know, everything's rosy, roses,
Mm-hmm.
rose-colored glasses thing, but they're there to kind of care for the people and create spaces for them to report things that aren't working. But there's this sort of other side of the fence, or this other sort of team or group of individuals who have had really terrible experiences with HR, who view them as sort of the heavy for the CEO, or they're really, you know, they don't view, that HR doesn't view the people as people, they view them more as labor units. And, I'm asking this question because you brought this thing to HR and they said, well, are you sure that happened? Like that is sort of
Exactly.
goes the types of experiences that these folks on this sort of other side of the fence must have had to have the view of HR that they have, that's sort of just totally different than how I sort of see it, or how I see like it should be. So talk to me a little
Yeah.
bit about that. I mean, this is a difficult one to sort of generalize and put your finger on, but I'd like to kind of talk about this broad sort of dichotomy of how people view this function, how you've seen it sort of operate, and how we can sort of help elevate that function.
Yeah, in my experience, HR is sold to the people as we're there for you. Come to us if you have any questions. We'll be that we're the person that you go to help work with your manager. But when it comes to advocating for policies, HR's function in an organization is to protect the company from a lawsuit. So in my experience, the only time an employee actually has an advocate is if you're in a union and you have a union rep. And then the union rep represents you against HR in the company.
Interesting.
So
So that's how
in my
you kind of see the world working.
that's been my experience. Now HR, the business rep person, HR is the first intake person, is the one that's always helped me the most because they explain the policies and procedures. But whenever it got to the second level where I needed to file the formal complaint, that's when the senior level HR business partner would come in, and then they would be the one that started documenting everything, but then that they're the ones that actually
There was an
call
agenda
in.
behind it.
there there's an agenda because they're taking notes for the company lawyer, because
Interesting.
now what they're trying to see is if I'm going to pursue it with an employment lawyer.
Can they do
And
both? Is it possible for it to serve both functions, or should there be two functions, like basically a built-in union for the people that is the opposite, or the foil, so to speak, for the HR department, which is really the defender of the organization against lawsuits in your model?
There should be a second. I think there should be a second there should be a second representation, because I think you can't wear two hats. Either you're defending the company from a lawsuit, because really that's what HR should be there, is to protect, because their loyalty is divided. They're also representing the boss. So how do you all of a sudden wear two hats? You're protecting
Yeah.
the employee, and you're protecting, because your employee is the one bringing forward the complaint, but it's also, your employee is also the manager.
Yeah, I mean, think about the name human resources. I mean, I guess this is just how I've always kind of looked at it, that this is the resource, these are resources for the humans. Maybe that's a stupid way
Hmm.
to look at it.
It's
But
true.
what you're talking about is really like, this is the management of the human resources, not even people. These are just,
Hmm.
this is the management of the labor units, and being able to put up
Yeah.
firewalls against sort of these leeches who are going to sort of take advantage of the organization. It's a very adversarial, you know,
Hmm.
that's more of a totally adversarial potentially role that it can play, as opposed to sort of more of like a caring role that can
Exactly.
actually create, you know, a space of safety for folks to really
Hmm.
be themselves and unleash their gifts, and you know, empower them to pursue the mission of the organization. It's almost
Exactly.
like they're different purposes that I'm
Well,
talking
and it's like you almost need a labor relations department where you have a representation for, and it's hard when you're not unionized. So when you have clear unions, and you can have a union rep, and you can have managers against employees, and you can have these like definitive boundaries. But when you're in a smaller organization where you don't have that, then who represents the bosses, and who represents the employees, and who
about.
takes sides? And how do you like, I would like to see an organization that has coaches and mediation, where you can hopefully, it doesn't get to that ugly part. It's just like, can we just all get together in a room and talk about this, and clear the air?
Right. Is it impossible? So is it a size thing? Beyond a certain size, it just gets so complex and everyone's just really a cell in this sort of larger, you know, full on organism, and no one can really do anything? Or is there any hope for the folks who get into HR? Like, the people who get into HR are not necessarily on average trying to, hey, I want to sort of, workers stink and I want to sort of take advantage of them. You know what I'm saying? That's not why they get into it. That's not what their heart is. But then they get into it, and sort of the role is maybe different than what they think. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what is the hope in this issue that we're talking about?
Um, I think size complicates it, because once you get into a really big organization, there's just more people in the pot. So humans are complicated.
Hmm.
If you're looking in a smaller organization, I think two people can go out for coffee and settle their differences, and then it's not a big deal. But when you're looking at an organization that employs 20,000 employees, and then you're dividing those employees into pods, and then those pods have managers, and then those managers need an HR representative, and then it just gets more complicated, and you're at more of an arm's length. So then how do you communicate to those people, and how do you teach the managers how to be better leaders, and then how do you teach the staff to be better followers, and things like that?
How does an
um,
HR department sort of like change the feeling that the employees have towards them if it's a negative one?
I
In a
think it comes
credible way. How do they credibly do it?
I think it comes down to branding. So I think you need to have newsletters, you need to have emails, you need to have videos. It's the same thing. That's like same thing that LinkedIn's doing on a platform. You need to have a way to communicate to those people in a way that's engaging to them.
We're talking about
So
employer branding, basically.
employer branding, it's everywhere. And you know what? And it has to be in a way that speaks to the audience. So if you find that you're sending out newsletters and your employees aren't on your internet or aren't reading their emails, then you need to change up your game and speak to them in a way
Mm.
that they're engaging with
I love that. That's a really great idea. And it's a blind spot for a lot of organizations, frankly,
you.
because
Hmm.
they're so externally focused on, hey, let's get those sales in here. And they have this whole other resource pot that's inside their organization. And you know, especially in today's day and age where we're inundated with so many ads and
Mhm.
we're really thirsty for authenticity, there's an opportunity to create genuine, authentic advocates who are internal to your organization. You know,
Exactly.
imagine, you know, a huge blind spot I think companies have is, or organizations, I should say, because this spans into nonprofits as well, is that um, they they market to the outside, but they don't market to the inside. And if they can
So true.
resonate, you know, every organization wants to be loved by their clients, whatever that is,
Mhm.
right? But how are you going to have clients who love your organization if the people who are delivering your organization's service don't love your organization?
That's true.
That's the place to put the money and the focus, in my mind. If you can get people to love your organization and resonate and develop a purpose and empower them to, you know, affect that purpose and pursue that purpose in an authentic way, and they love your organization, the likelihood of you getting people on the outside who are interacting with your organization to actually love your organization is like way higher. You know what
Definitely.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why don't people get that?
I have no idea. Because that's just it. When you're human resources, your customer is your internal staff.
Well,
So
I mean,
you should be
in
having just as
theory,
many.
in
Mhm.
theory it is, but actually what you were just saying and sort of what this other
Yeah.
camp would say is that their client is really executives or the company at large to prevent attacks essentially from
The
the people.
staff.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
what
I
is
just
it? Like,
realized that.
who's the
Yeah.
client? You know, I mean, again, I would agree with what you just said that their
Yeah.
client are the people and we want to take care of people. Of course, you want to protect against sort of people who are infiltrating and trying to take advantage and things like
Hmm.
that. But if we're talking about building an authentic culture and taking our values off the wall and actually living out our mission statement, which
Hmm.
every freaking organization has a mission page. If we're actually talking about authentically living it out, then to your point, these people who are called whistleblowers, who are really kind of culture quality controllers, they need
Sure.
to be encouraged and they need to be rewarded. And HR needs to focus on serving their client, the people, to
Yeah.
enable them to be empowered toward pursuing this purpose. I think we're going to see this pendulum swing back over this next decade. And I think
Hmm.
we're going to see a big separation between companies that get what you and I are talking about and those who are still holding on to these old structures that are still imposed on a lot of organizations now that are leading toward these PTSD situations,
Yeah.
leading toward people driving home every day with a knot in their stomach. And listen, you're not always going to get it right, but
No,
um, it's a heart question. Like, where
it
is your
is true.
heart?
Yeah. And we have people like this Simon guy who's talking about your why statement.
Mhm.
Everyone wants a greater purpose when they go to work. It's not about just a paycheck because
Correct.
we technically can go anywhere and get a paycheck. They want to have a why. They want to have purpose fulfillment when they go to work too.
And from my experience and in the organizations that we deal with thousands of companies, and the ones that get that, they end up getting all these benefits that the ones who don't get it are trying to get. And that
That's
is a
true.
lower turnover rate. They have
Yep.
people who stay there longer because that purpose, the why
Hmm.
of that company is resonating with the why of the individuals. And to
Hmm.
your point, you know, it's not that people are inherently less loyal. It's just
Yep.
that there's more options. So it's really on an organization to continually try to sell essentially
Hmm.
themselves as an employer to the people who have higher labor mobility
For
optionality
sure.
than they've ever had in the past.
That is so true. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about. I want to be conscious of time here, but let's talk a little bit about the privacy stuff.
Oh, okay.
So you're a privacy consultant. Tell us about what that work is like, what that transition has been like, and what the big blind spots you see most organizations have in this realm.
Well, with privacy consulting, it's all about protecting personal information. So every small business or every business is collecting personal information. So we collect your name, your in when you think of HR, all of your resume information, your education, your job history, and then you think of everything that shows up on your taxes. So your social insurance number, all of that data is collected, so there's an element of trust that we're gonna secure that information. We're gonna hold it private. We're gonna put it in a database. We're gonna put passwords on it. We're gonna make sure that we don't sell it. If someone breaks into our database, we're gonna tell you about it. We're gonna apologize. We're gonna tell you how to protect your data. if it got attacked by a ransomware. There's also a duty to protect that information. So a lot of companies should have a budget for cybersecurity awareness. So we should be training our staff how to recognize cyber attacks, like ransomware. When these links come in, how do we recognize what a cyber attack link is? Ransomware right now is where you click a link and they actually can infiltrate your system, hold it ransom.
This ransomware thing is crazy.
It is
It's
everywhere.
crazy, and it's everywhere.
And a teenager can do it
Yeah,
from a computer
and
and charge you Bitcoin to get it back.
I have a buddy who runs a printing business. Again, it's not a multi-billion-dollar business. I mean, it's pretty big, but it's not a multi-billion-dollar
Yep.
business. And they got held ransom. Like, how did they even find this company? Do you know what I'm saying? It's
No, and it's crazy, and it can cripple you. And what happens is it's not so much the money that they can take from you, it's your reputation.
yeah,
So you have to go to all your clients and say, I screwed up. I clicked this link, or worse yet, it might have been someone you hired on Fiverr who is your virtual assistant who clicked it and
right.
totally left you vulnerable. And then you have to tell all of your clients, and then you sometimes have to pay for their identity theft security so that they can check themselves.
And if you think about it, I mean, I guess it's sort of like, from a legal definition, it is technically negligence if you click this link, but it's not like gross negligence. You know what I'm saying? We get thousands of emails. Like, these aren't like, it doesn't say, hey, this is a ransomware email. It sometimes looks like a real one. I have a friend who, got an email from their bank, and it looked totally legit, and they ended up getting, some stuff stolen. So like, it's a high sophistication level on like the perpetrator side.
They will take clip art from your banking website and they'll copy it.
And they'll mask the URL, and the URL looks the same. I mean, they're
very sophisticated.
But there's still that sort of reputational risk. If it happens, it's crazy.
Exactly. And they're hitting, like, they're indiscriminate. So they can send out hundreds and thousands of these emails, and it's called phishing. So like phishing, PHISH. So they send them out in masses, and they just hope to catch someone off guard. And it will cripple small business owners. So that's why I've kind of pivoted. So instead of working for the big guys, the big corporate CEOs and these government agencies, I want to work for the everyday business owner, or entrepreneur, or startup. And that's sort of where I'm kind of focusing my energies, because it's the everyday business owner that needs help in identifying these things. I also write policies and procedures for these small business owners, because they hire a secretary and they hope that she knows how to do this. But
do they?
No, they don't, unfortunately. So I'm working with another privacy consultant in Alberta, and together we've created a 300-page manual that you can download, and through filling out an online form, you can pretty much just brand your own manual.
Sweet.
And have it already designed for you with a click of a button.
So the manual is great, and then you have to push that out so that the behaviors actually are affected.
Exactly. And then that's where you can hire me on retainer, and I can help mentor your staff so that you have me sort of like on your shoulder when there's a privacy breach. You can just call me up and I can mentor your staff on how to help you as like a virtual service.
Why is there a blind spot for organizations across the board, but probably more so on sort of the smaller side, for this kind of stuff? Is it this will only happen to the other guy fallacy? Is it I don't really think this is that much of a risk? Like, what are the big sort of roots of these blind spots that you see on this side?
It's basically, it's not going to happen to me. So and it's one of those things, it's like money. So it's like, why we all have money. We all carry money for the most part. Let's say we all walk around, when we go on to traveling, we all carry. So when I went on a vacation, I put US in my wallet, and I go on vacation. I pray to death no one's going to rob me in the back alley. But technically, I have a wallet, and someone can steal my money in my wallet. It's the same thing with personal information. We have all of this gobs of personal information in our filing cabinets. Like, think of a doctor. He has all these patient files. He has a laptop that he probably takes back and forth to work every single day. He hopes to God that he doesn't leave his car unlocked and someone steals the laptop with 600,000 patient files on it. He hopes that he doesn't leave his flash drive somewhere where someone steals the information. And he hopes to God that his clinic doesn't burn down, everyone hopes it never happens to them. But technically, according to laws, you're supposed to have policies and procedures. You're supposed to train your staff. You're supposed to have all of these things in place. So the idea is and the hot spot for me is how do I walk into a doctor's office and say, you really should hire me? Because legally, you're supposed to have these things in place. It's like HR. You're hiring humans. You really should have an HR department. There's a cost to it. No one wants to spend money.
Maybe
But
you can do a ransomware thing where you actually hold them ransom and then
hold them ransom.
until they hire you.
You can pay me Bitcoin to hire me, and then I'll release your files. I just need a
See, you should
computer
have had
hacker.
me. Exactly. You should have had
I
some
like the way
policies.
you think. Hire a hacker.
That's funny.
So yeah, there's potential. The thing is I also could clean up after people who had privacy breaches, because that's usually when people hire a consultant, is after they were a victim of a breach.
Yeah, you hire the personal trainer once you get the cholesterol report back. You know what I mean?
Pretty much, unfortunately. So yeah.
So where can people find you?
RebeccaResendes.com. That's my website. That's probably the quickest way. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. So I do write, I do share as much content that I can on LinkedIn, teaching people little bits here and there on how they can protect themselves and how they can basically stand up for their rights.
Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation. This has been a lot of fun. I think we touched on so many cool topics, and
I love it.
I just really enjoyed our time and just appreciate you making the time to come on the Ethics Experts, being so forthcoming with all your experiences and all your advice. And I just appreciate your presence here today. This was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed myself.